Okay, so welcome to another episode of the podcast. If you're listening on your favorite podcast audio platform, be sure to leave us a good review so we can keep sharing good information like we're sharing with our guests today. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to hit the subscribe button and like us as well. So today we have a special guest, Jason Azevedo. Did I say that correctly, Jason?
You got it perfect.
Okay, from Texas. You're out in Texas. I'm in New Jersey. And we're going to tell your story today. So maybe you want to share, your background, where you grew up a little bit, and then we'll get into all the other stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Mitch.
Glad you're here.
I'm excited to kind of hang out and talk a bit today.
Yeah, definitely.
So my story is kind of different than a lot of people's. You got to I'll set the stage because there was a couple major things going on when I started my career.
Good.
But first off, out of the gate, I was 15 years old.
Okay.
Decided I was going to start my first company at 15. A kind of a crazy time. Then add in at the exact same time, it's February of 2007. So right before markets, just completely
real estate just blew up.
To hell.
Yep.
In addition to that, and incredibly important at the same time, my father was working in a factory that and he'd worked there for 28 years. That this factory was every bad thing you could think of in a factory. Workers hated the management hated the workers. It was dimly lit, dangerous machines. They were getting traded by companies left and right. So he got laid off 7 or 8 times in about as many years.
This is all in Texas?
No, this was in California.
Oh, so California. Okay.
Originally grew up in Silicon Valley, California.
Okay.
Watched that whole environment and valley come up actually around me.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because my brother and I are starting a manufacturing company in February of 2007. We're watching.
You're 15?
And I'm 15. Okay. He's 20.
Yeah, sure. Why wait?
Exactly. We're two kids who don't know anything about anything, basically. And we decide to start a manufacturing company. And at the time it was an apparel manufacturer.
Okay. So you're going to make clothes.
Yeah, we're making clothes, and largely it started as printing T-shirts, but quickly entered the clothing sector.
Okay.
So we're getting into this, and we've got our dad going through this other thing on the other side, and we're telling ourselves we're never going to be that. If we're going to be in this space, we're never, ever going to treat our employees the way that they're being treated. We're not going to run our facilities like they're being ran.
Right.
So,
nor did you want to ever be in the position that your dad's now in, right?
Yeah, exactly. We saw what happens on the family side when you do something like that, and the community side.
Yeah.
So we start building this company, and come fall of 2007, the market starts to crack.
Yeah.
And we have every person in the world telling us, don't start a business right now.
Right.
You're gonna lose everything.
Right. It wasn't just real estate. It was having a ripple effect on a lot of
things. It was destroying everything.
Yeah.
And every person this is a horrible time. You're young kids. You don't know what you're going to do. And the interesting part, it was every person who had never done it themselves telling us that.
That's always the case. Well, because they're nervous to do it themselves. And then they reflect that on you. Yeah. And they don't want you to get hurt either, that they think they would get hurt if they did it. So that's human nature.
Totally.
Not very supportive, but it's human.
Well, and every person who had done it is like, hey, every
market
sucks to start.
Right. Exactly. There's always risks involved. If it's not this, it'll be something else, Yeah.
I remember specifically a person told my brother and I, and that they were actually an associated family member. Mm-hmm. And they're like, you guys are going to lose everything you have. And we kind of sat and turned to each other and he started almost giggling. And we're like, we don't have anything. $600.
Right. Well, we got nothing to lose. It's perfect time.
Yeah. And it clicked suddenly. We're like, if there was ever a time to bet, it's now.
Right. Of course. It's interesting though, that you recognize the dichotomy between the people that were telling you this and the people that were saying, who had done it, that were saying, listen, Jason, there's risks all the time. I mean, you can't wait for all the lights to turn green to head towards down. And I think a lot of times we need to take a step back, right? When people are telling us, don't do that, be careful, don't make a mistake. You got to look at who are they? What have they accomplished in their life? You want to take advice from the right people.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember someone who it was actually a dear friend, had actually lost everything at one point.
Yeah.
I mean, just went from an 800 person company to nothing, actually negative nothing.
Bankruptcy.
Yeah. And I remember asking him, I'm like, would you do it again?
Yeah.
He goes, I did it 2 more times.
Yeah, right. I know people that have lost it and got it back 4 times.
Yeah. And he anything he would tell us during these things, we'd listen to him through anything because he knew what it felt like the whole time.
And you take risks, and if you lose, it's a learning experience, and you can build it up again.
Well, and what it taught us is to run companies, and especially manufacturing companies. Most people think of manufacturing, and they've got a very old mentality of what it is.
Yeah, right.
And we're like, hey guys, a factory nowadays is not your 19th century factory. They look nothing like a 20th century factory.
Right, right. You're not up in the big box up there looking down on the floor and ringing the bell. No. It's not different.
Yeah, this is not like this is not like Charles Dickens and like dirt floors and Tiny Tim's losing an arm. Like none of that. That's just not the case anymore.
Right.
So when we started our private equity fund, our whole focus was, hey, let's go into these very, very legacy U.S. Manufacturing companies. They're good companies putting up good profits with good people.
But they're still operating like it's 40 years ago.
Well, and a lot of them have tons of opportunity in front of them, but the owners, they're aging out. They
Yeah. So they're,
And how many people are being told right now, go buy manufacturing companies?
Right.
So, but they're great businesses. So we, from the private equity side, we buy them now. And the good thing is, because of our past, we know how to run them in pretty much any market space.
Right.
And we build these up and start interconnecting them and making sure that they flow and bringing them into modern manufacturing. And you just watch everything from the facilities to the people just change, because they're used to, some of them, very grueling jobs. And we're like, hey, these don't have to be grueling anymore. That's not it's not the reality anymore in these spaces.
Right. But that was a lot of experience. I mean, that was years of doing this. So you're back now, you're 15. Your brother luckily was 20. So at least he was an adult. He could do more things. And
so funny story. Our first trade show.
I mean, what do? You cut some material and pin it up on a wall. I mean,
so we started, like I said, we had $600 each. We teamed up with another person that we knew that had the very base pieces of equipment to print a t-shirt.
Right. It was like graphic tees, that type of stuff.
Kind of that at first.
Yeah.
And what happened was graphic tees come 2008. Nobody's buying a family reunion shirt when they just lost their job.
Yeah.
So that market drops out.
Okay.
So we realize that the market that we should be in is the most complicated, pain in the butt stuff to do. So we decided to go the exact opposite direction of a normal group. And we went and tried to learn the most complex and try the most complex processes possible. And it was cool because at that time, just starting out, we were buying equipment for pennies on the dollar.
Okay.
And we're buying really old equipment.
What did the equipment do?
To print t-shirts, to sew things, to print like all sorts
all
of
apparel
stuff.
Manufacturing, different kinds. Okay.
And so we're buying stuff that is from the 50s, 60s, learning to be mechanics because we have to get it all to run correctly.
Right.
And just kind of built it by recycling the profits back in. But what was really interesting is because we had gone to the ultimate complexity, we were doing stuff that no other people would even touch.
Right.
All of these very high-end clients in the US, nobody's doing cheap stuff because the cheap giveaways, when the economy is that bad, they're looked at as just a waste of money.
Right.
But if you can come up with something crazy and do it for a regular price, they're like, hey, the marketing team's like, hey, I don't have much of a budget this year, but I'm going to use it on this one crazy thing, hoping it works, this trick pony. So we started getting in at these companies and these clothing companies that were just looking for that trick pony, that the most complex thing possible, so that they would at least stand out with the limited amount of merch they were going to put out.
So you were manufacturing for them, like contract manufacturing type of stuff?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So we started getting into this kind of crazier stuff. Well, what we started to learn was we were building systems to manufacture this stuff because it was so complicated. It wasn't just 3 inputs of resources and it pops out a unit. we start developing out these systems of how do you take a bunch of kids.
Right.
I mean, at one point we had 25 employees. Our average shop age was 18. So,
okay. So young
take
kids.
all these kids have no experience. We're trying to like put together this company, and we just ended up having to create tons and tons of systems because you would have some turnover because guys would get a girlfriend and hey,
Right.
that I don't have
They're
to work
unreliable
anymore.
at that age. Yeah. So how did you get a lot of your jobs? What were you? I mean, what kind of contacts did you have? How did you get into these companies?
So we were fortunate to meet good people early on. We had connections with the high school that I was attending. So we're doing their stuff. That we knew a very prominent local soccer club that our family was involved with. And then in addition to that, I remember us going to a trade show. We had a 10 by 10 booth. It was me and my brother standing in this booth.
Right.
And all of a sudden, the two of us are just kind of very focused, very prim and proper. And everyone's like, what do you do? The most complex stuff you possibly can. And they're like, oh yeah, we hear that from everybody. And we pull out a sample and they go, wow, what is that? We're like, it's stuff other people won't touch. And that was our sales pitch.
Can you give me an example since I don't really know the business? Like what makes it complex? What are we talking about?
So I'll give you an example. We did one for a company one time that they basically found malware in products.
Okay.
So we did these shirts for them. They had this massive trade show booth and they had an event the night before and they gave out thousands of shirts and they said, stop
as a corporate promotion.
Yeah. It was a corporate promotion.
Yeah. Got it.
Totally. And they give out thousands of these shirts and said, stop by our booth tomorrow wearing the shirt and we'll give you something.
Okay.
Okay. So as you walk into the booth, there's archways at every single entrance that are all black light.
Got it.
We have impregnated the shirt with a photochromatic ink that responds to the black light. So they come in wearing just this normal corporate shirt. And all of these malware terms suddenly start going off as soon as you're in their booth. And they're shining on the shirt in 20 different places. And people are like, what is going on? And like, why is this moving? And they won every award at that trade show that year.
And not very few guys could do this kind of stuff.
Most people didn't even know that the technology existed. We had to actually go back to the late 70s, early 80s to find the chemical that could do this. Because that was the last time people really were into like black light crazy stuff.
So it was a certain kind of ink or a certain kind of additive to the ink?
It was an additive that we were able to get to embed into the shirt. So like we were doing that. We did one time. It was this giant cupcake for somebody.
Right.
And it was puffed up ink and there was sparkles in it. And we figured out how to homogenize and embed vanilla scent into the inks.
So it would smell like a vanilla cupcake.
You're a vanilla cupcake.
Got it. Cool. Okay. Now I'm understanding. Okay.
Yeah. So we would just go do weird, crazy stuff like that. We did clothing companies that people that were putting inks into cotton polyester blends that literally eat the cotton the first time you wash it. So it just leaves this mesh of polyester. It was just random weird stuff. But then we started bridging that into just other forms of manufacturing because we kind of got bored in the t-shirt industry. We're like, we've got this cool team. What else can we make? And then next thing you know, it's sheet metal injection molding. We did orthopedic insoles, children's toys, nuclear reactor parts. We've literally done everything.
Yeah. But they were all like challenging projects where somebody, either you came up creatively or they would come to you and say, hey, we want to do this. We don't know how to do it.
Yeah. So usually the latter. People would come in and go, we've been working on this thing. I mean, I've gotten multiple phone calls from people I've never met and they go, are you Jason? Yeah. I got I have a hurdle that I need to cross. And I've talked to 3 of my friends and all 3 of them said the same name. Are you willing to sit down and talk about a project?
Got it. So you got referred because they were like, listen, if anybody's going to figure this out, it's going to be Jason and his team.
Yeah, exactly. And we've gotten tons of projects like that where people are just like, hey, I've got this huge hurdle in front of me. And they go, okay, well, call these guys. At very least, they'll know where to send you. And we'll pick up these projects that most people won't touch. But we're like, hey, we're as long as you're down to understand that there's a development process, we're down to develop with you. And then they turn into usually large programs because if the customer is fighting that hard to figure out how to do it, it's because they know they need to do it over and over and over again. This is not a one-off game. Nobody puts that much work in for the one-off.
Right. So, but you didn't have like a team of like PhD scientists and engineers.
Oh,
You're all kind of young people. You're figuring this stuff out just on your own.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. I mean, I go back to we buy legacy American manufacturing companies because what I learned back then was the guys who were, or the guys and girls that were at retirement age, nobody was listening to them. Right. Everyone was looking at them and saying, oh, your ideas are old. They don't match the matter market. Well, here we are 15, 16 years old. And we learned that the people that would give us the most information were the people that everyone was casting out to pasture.
Got it.
And they were geniuses. They had
the most experience, of course.
Yeah. So we just, that was our network of, and it was funny because they'd like pass us around as cute little kids, like, hey, you got to see these
teaching
kids.
You things, right? If you were 30, they probably would have been like, get out of here.
Yeah. But we were so they were so green and frankly dumb that they were like, yeah, okay, just help these poor kids out.
Right.
And we've continued that till this day.
Interesting.
With the companies that we buy these companies from is we keep all the owners on as advisors because they've seen everything. Like in the last 20 years, they've seen a 9/11 crash, a .com crash.
Right.
They've seen the 2008. They saw COVID. I mean, that's just in the last 22 decades of their careers.
In the 80s, they saw the tremendous stock market crash in the late 80s.
Yeah, and that most of them have seen that. So like, they have seen so much, and yet people don't listen. And it's almost baffling to me. But it's kind of our secret weapon. We just go in.
Yeah, no, look, you recognize something that people are too short to discount, and they don't realize that it's there. So did you stay with the company? You never went to college? You stayed with the company, kept working and doing everything?
So I actually went to college for, if I remember correctly, about 2 years. And it's interesting because I got most of my upper credits because they offered those classes at 6 and 7 in the morning. But your general ed classes are offered midday.
Right.
So
you're working.
Yeah. And once I crossed into that line where I needed to start taking my general eds.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to leave at 11 o'clock to go do a 12 o'clock class. Like, and I had to make a decision. And I remember actually sitting with my father. I'll never forget this day. And like I said, he was on the factory side. And I remember going into him going, hey, I'm going to drop out of college. And he goes, okay, I'm going to tell you something right now that I can never, that I don't want to change your opinion, but just, I'm going to tell you something.
Okay.
Remember when you have a son, you're not going to be able to tell him to go. He goes, because I didn't go. And he goes, so I'm going to let you make this decision, but just remember when you have a son, you're going to be in the same spot. And it's hard. And it stuck with me because I'm like, God, it's almost heart-wrenching.
Right. Well, he put it on you.
Yeah. And I ended up
smart guy.
About a week later, I made the decision. I was like, and I remember weighing in, I had 25 employees at the time. Yeah. I remember going, okay, do I believe I can make this company work? And I do believe that. If I go to school and I really go focus and get that done, do I believe that the company will work the same way? The answer was no. So I just made the decision. I felt at the time it was best for the company and for the employees. And looking back, I don't regret it.
Yeah.
But there's been a couple of days you're sitting there going, God, maybe.
Well, I don't think there's any correlation between success and a college education. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't. I think everyone should get a college education, but there's plenty of people, a lot, that have not been successful with a college education and been very successful without a college education, because I don't think they're really tied together.
Yeah, I mean,
there's the different route is what it is. Just
I've got some very well-educated business partners, and there are things that they know or have been taught that I have not. So,
but you have them.
Well, and that's
they're your business partner.
Make sure you well-round your teams.
Right, exactly. Which you should do anyway, you do, right? Yeah,
you're going to do fine. And I mean, that's another thing that we went into is we do everything as a team because we all know each other's strengths and weaknesses. So with the fund, we've got 4 general partners and a broader team, and they are the support system. We all know where each other click. When we go into a facility, it's funny because we all have very different things we're looking at. Remember, we were at a facility one time, and one of the guys came, and we walk out, and we're picking apart this company.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Oh, so that one's off the list." And all of us are like, no. That one is perfect. And he goes, "But you all have a nitpick for it." We're like, we found easy things to fix, each one of us. So we'll get this thing, we'll double it in the next couple of months. If you walk in and everything's flawless,
well, then there's nothing to do.
Exactly. That's good if you plan to just kind of let it grow normally.
Right.
But if you can find a couple quick fixes, hey, that's instant EBITDA that you can open up.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So you're back. So you started expanding the company, you and your brother. You had people working for you. And what did you get into after? Like, how did you make the transition from there? You didn't just start an equity fund after that, right?
No.
So how'd you get out of the t-shirt business and start doing other things?
So we gradually morphed where the t-shirt company was still running, but we started doing in-store retail displays. So for Best Buy, Costco,
end cap type of things,
in-cap stuff.
Got it. Okay.
So that is a really interesting space to be in because you are touching so many different types of manufacturing. If you look at a typical end cap, there'll be sheet metal work on it, woodworking on it, digital printing, plastic assembly, injection molded parts, thermoformed parts, electronics assembled into them. So it puts you in this weird situation where it is not a defined role. And frankly, your customers want it to be different every single time than anything else they've done.
Right.
So we started in that industry, really buying out a lot of the work. And then we get frustrated with one vendor because their quality wasn't right or their timelines sucked or whatever it was. And we go, you know what? We're going to build a plastics company, or we're going to buy a plastic company, or we're going to buy a button company, or
because that vendor was difficult to deal with. You said, the hell, let's buy our own.
Exactly.
Or start our own.
Right, and our whole thing is service first, make sure the clients are very well taken care of.
Right.
Well, when somebody goes, "Oh yeah, sorry, we're running behind by 4 weeks," you're like, "Well, but that's not an option."
Problem. Right.
Yeah. You run overtime, do whatever it does. We have a set date.
Right.
So we started buying or building all of these different operations internally.
All that complemented each other.
All that complements each other. And then all that were integrated to each other.
Got it.
Well, all of a sudden we've got extra capacity. So we're like, oh, well, I mean, let's just service
for other people.
Specific clients.
Right. Got it. So you, in theory, you were already building a private equity fund. You were just acquiring companies and they just they're all in the manufacturing space, right?
Yeah. So we were doing it privately with ourselves and we were building most of our own companies. That was our way.
Most of them were startups and.
Yeah, we would go buy the equipment, learn how to do it,
right,
tune it in, get it all like that.
Got it.
When we switched or when we started the private equity, really what happened was we started to see more and more businesses coming up for sale in the manufacturing space. And these are businesses that a typical private equity won't buy.
Okay. Why is that? Yeah.
They're too mom and pop. Okay. So they're 40, 50, 60 years old.
Right. They don't have the paperwork, the financials, the systems that a private equity guy needs to be comfortable with.
Correct. And they're,
I know, I deal with businesses like this all the time.
Yeah. And they're lower mid-market.
Right.
So we ended up in this weird spot where we started seeing these companies. And then I started realizing they weren't selling, which was even weirder.
Well, because the buying pool is much smaller. It's tough. People don't really plan on selling their business until later on. They don't equip it that way. And then you're missing financials, and you guys are good at what you do and you get a feel for things, but you also get probably the benefit of lower pricing because they don't have the stuff to demonstrate certain things.
We do. And we get a lot of seller carry on stuff because the majority of the clients that we're looking, or companies we're buying, they are companies that oftentimes the owner thought their kids were going to take it.
Right.
But the kids were raised saying, go to college, don't get into manufacturing.
Become a professional,
this is a horrible
stay
industry.
out of my business. Right. Yeah.
And they talked it down because they wanted better for their kids.
Right. But it kind of screwed them.
Well, it screwed them. And what happened was in the last 10, 15 years, the story changed.
Okay.
Manufacturing was in the US was not pretty 15 years ago.
No.
But technology, cost of moving goods, all of that changed it in the opposite direction, where these are great jobs. They're safe, they're clean,
Right.
but that stigma is still there. So the kids don't want the companies.
Yeah. Right.
So
no, I understand.
we come in and for all intents and purposes, we almost act like the kids of the owners, where it's, hey, I'm going to protect the legacy of this company.
Right.
Which
is important to these guys. You know, they spent the whole lifetime building a company or running a company that their father built or whatever. And it means a lot to them, even though, you know, you might not think that, but it does.
Well, it does. And you got to remember, for most of these people, their last name is on the building. I mean,
exactly.
That was the trend. You name it after yourself.
Right.
So, and these are in towns, oftentimes in communities, that they're significant in that community, where they actually employ. We're looking at a company right now that employs more people than their headquarters' town has. You just imagine the impact of a company like that.
Right. Sure.
So we come in and basically go, hey, we're going to protect your legacy. We're going to build this up together. We're going to move it to the next moment in history and modernize stuff and get it there. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect it to a national portfolio, so that now, instead of being lower mid-market, you are now truly mid-market.
Yeah, you get a lot of leverage than they didn't have.
We're going to do it by connecting you without losing the legacy that's within that community. So they're interconnected companies that are still individual nodes that are sharing information, tools, data, customers, but they're still their own. And that, first off, goes a long way with the sellers, goes a heck of a long way with the employees. And frankly, it's what is needed in the US right now, is to really preserve our communities and strengthen them as much as possible.
Yeah.
So we went one step further and said, hey, and we all sat down, and my brother and I go back to that initial conversation of, we will never treat our employees like our father was. So we decided to do an employee stock ownership program and transfer 100% of the shares to the employees. So
of that particular company?
No, of the entire portfolio.
Okay.
So the way
so you
that
did a big ESOP of the
for the way our investors
of the whole
exit,
global enterprise.
Correct. So the way our investors exit and when liquidate at year about 5 to 7 is we ESOP the entire portfolio to the employees.
Got it.
Now you're protecting that local community. It's a great return on investment for the investors. You've got, frankly, a guaranteed locked in buyer. So you're not trying to market time or any of that other crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So in our opinion, it's the best case for everybody. And it goes back to that core ethos of make sure the people are taken care of and that everybody in the system is winning.
Okay. So you're not coming in and writing them a big check. What you're doing is you're saying, listen, you have a small business here. You might not have the best records in the world. We can turn this business around. We're going to give you stock in the company. Maybe there's some cash. I don't know how you exactly structured the deals. And then when you're ready to exit, you can sell it off in the ESOP pool, right?
Correct. So
smart and very, very smart. I like the model.
Yeah. And it's a slightly different. So every deal is completely different.
Of course, it depends on the deal.
The average is we purchase at is about 3.5 to 5x EBITDA. Okay. Sellers usually roll back into the fund with a chunk of their cash out.
Take some cash off the table.
Yeah, they get some cash and then they carry some more.
Right.
Well, when we conglomerate that portfolio nationally,
and do they often stay on for a while?
We ask that all stay on as advisors. And so far, not a single one has ever not wanted to. So because we go back to, it is really nice to be able to call them and go, have you ever seen anything like this?
Right. Exactly.
With the ESOP, because we've conglomerated nationally, what we're looking at is a 10 to 12x exit.
Because you're basically a multi-state operator. You got locations all over the place. You got a lot of leverage. Sure.
And the stability's there. So we expect the trustee to value at 10 to 12x. So if we did nothing to these companies, we kind of have this
just
built
the multiple, right? Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just interviewed a guy who's from a company called Mr. Jeff. They're like a laundry franchise business. And basically what they do is they give systems, right? Everything to run a laundromat. But the laundromat business, very much like the dry cleaning business, which is like dead on a stick right now.
Yeah.
You don't get leverage as a local operator because you don't have access to data. You don't have access to national accounts. You guys can probably buy things, even supplies at a lower price than a small local manufacturing company can, because your volume is much bigger, right?
Oh, totally. And frankly, like in a situation like we are right now with the supply chain.
Yeah.
When you can go, hey, in 3 weeks, I'm going to own this plant and that plant and this plant, all of which are customers of yours. I do expect that my supply chain issue is going to be lower than everyone else's.
Right. You have a much more competitive supply chain because you control a lot of it.
Yeah. You're like, well, hey, if I have to switch the color at all, if I'm buying this color and hey, I can't get it, I'm going to have to switch it at all of my plants.
Right.
And then all of a sudden people are like, oh, well, how can we help you? And it's the power of working together and having that portfolio complete.
Sure.
And then of course we try to complement the companies. Hey, if you do one thing really well and you do one thing really well and you have customers that are opposite each other, let's use each other's vendor numbers to get into those customers.
Sure. Right. So you're buying businesses. You want them to have some complementary nature to the business. You're not going to buy a company that builds tree houses when you have nothing to do with that industry. Doesn't make any sense, right?
We will look at it, but usually, yes, we want them to make sense. There are sometimes you run across a deal that you're like, this would look really good in the, like, it's going to be a good number here. And it makes a lot of sense. And then what we'll do is they have something that can be used somewhere. I have yet to ever see a company that we look at and go, like a treehouse company. Well, they're probably really good at woodworking.
Yeah, I would think.
Can I have them design the crate manufacturing side of my two packaging companies?
Yeah, right. If you're in manufacturing, there's probably very little that you can't take advantage of or benefit from, right? So have you got you started 15 in manufacturing and it's been all manufacturing since then? That's all you guys do.
That has been I was that kid growing up that Legos and tractors were my absolute two favorite things. And it just hasn't changed. I just have much larger tractors and very different Legos now.
Yeah. Well, when I was a kid, I'm older than you. Legos were just these little bricks and you'd build anything you wanted. There wasn't like a kit and you build something Star Wars. It wasn't like that. They turned that whole business around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So how many businesses do you own right now? Does the fund own?
So the
fund, is it considered a fund basically, or is it a holding company or?
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to put a number on how many businesses because there's entities within entities.
Okay.
We've got a couple more coming online in what we expect to be the next couple weeks. It fluctuates. It's a fund. So the portfolio is there. We're currently in the sheet metal space, lightly in the injection molding, packaging, displays, of course, still. We make the control panels for every nuclear or every piece of GE nuclear equipment.
Is that a company you bought and then improved?
Yeah, that's a company we bought years.
Okay, so a
a
lot
really
of
interesting
technology.
company. We actually bought them.
It's an interesting business.
Years and years ago. I'll never forget. We bought them for $75,000. We paid them off in 2 months. It was best payoff, or maybe it may have been 3 or 4, but it was. We all just kind of sat there.
There's a lot of things to fix that were easy.
Well, no, it was a good company. The owner wanted to retire. That was it. It was simple as that.
Yeah. Got it.
And he wanted to make sure his people were, and actually at that point he was down to one person, but the person had been there for 25 years. So I remember on the signing, he goes, just make sure he's always taken care of. And I'm like, dude, of course. Like, and till this day, that guy still runs that company and he does an amazing job. And I love to know the fact that we held true to the thing we promised at that day at closing.
Yeah. Now, are most of your companies on the western half of the country, or are they all over the place? Or
so they're they're coming online all over the place. Of course, originally we're from California, so there's a heavy West Coast presence right now. Right now, we're working on both something in Texas, another thing in Arkansas, and we've got one that we've been working on that branches about 6 plants through the entire kind of Mississippi line.
So, and you're really working on the business these days. I mean, you're not involved with, right? You're on the acquisition side and analyzing the businesses and finding opportunities. Or are you working in some of the businesses?
All of it.
You're doing it all?
I go back to the reason why most PE can't function in this space is because they don't have the connection to the floor of the business. So
right, there's a hands-on aspect, right?
Yeah, I spend a lot of my time on the M&A side, on the financing side, on the running of the businesses, but I also spend a ton of time on the factory floors. And that is, I actually, in all fairness, probably do a better job as a leader for the business from the floor than I ever could from a desk. Manufacturing, and every industry tries to say this, but it's special in manufacturing. It's a people business.
Right.
And
for sure. I mean, some of it's automated, but at the end of the day,
but the reality is you sell
those robots.
You sell labor.
Yeah.
That is a huge chunk of the industry is labor. If you lose touch with that, and I'm the first to say, there have been times in my career where crazy things are happening on the business side. So you start losing touch a little bit there. And I've had other partners of mine come up to me and go, hey, can you just go spend some time with everybody? And it snaps me out of it. I'm like, oh, of course. And then I'll go take 2-3 weeks and be like, hey, what do we work on the floor today? What are we doing here? How do we do that? Let's work on this.
Right. Yeah. So are you traveling a lot? You have to go to these different places on the road all the time.
I had 3 weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago, I drove from Austin, Texas to Dallas to Little Rock to Northern Arkansas to Memphis.
This is driving?
Yes, we drove every single one of these.
You have an RV or you just in a car?
We had a Suburban and all of the GPs.
A Suburban.
Yeah. So then to Memphis, and then somehow one of the partners convinced everybody to drive from Memphis to Cocoa Beach, Florida.
It's better than California to Cocoa Beach,
Florida. But
still, it's Tennessee. What is it? 15 hours, 18 hours?
I think it was 16, something like that.
Okay.
And it was, but we drove it because it was better for us all to be trapped in our own capsule together and talking about what we're seeing at each one of these plants and how to work on them and how to, hey, I think we need to allocate this to that.
Right.
So it was, and we were spending about a day at each plant that we're stopping at. And it was definitely we got home, we were all very tired, but we got so much done that you can't do without actually going and talking and meeting with people.
Okay. I got 2 questions for you. Differently. Okay. So you've seen a lot of companies, you've met a lot of owners over your travels. You're still a young guy, but you've seen a lot of companies, guys. What would you think? What do you see a lot of these guys do wrong? Are there like consistent things that you find business owners in this space do wrong, don't miss or whatever, or is it all over the board? And what are those things?
So define wrong. Wrong in trying to sell their business, wrong in running their business.
Yeah, running their business, operating their business from in terms of, look, you have a business, you want it to grow, make money, live a good life. What are the things you see they do wrong from running their business?
So it's a simple sentence. This is the way we do it.
That's what they say? Yep. Well, that's how everybody does it. Who's everybody? I don't know. Everybody does. Yeah, that's what they say to do. Who's they? Well, you ever get this?
Why do you guys take out the trash at 2 o'clock every day?
That's how that's
when we do it.
Right.
And it's like, but think it like, why?
So it's a failure to really look at why you're doing things and if that makes sense or not, just as opposed to just, I don't know, we always stick the garbage out at 2 o'clock on Tuesday, And maybe that's not the best day, right?
Well, if we dig, what we end up finding out, and I'll use an example of one that we ran into. why do you load the steel like that?
Okay.
Well, because we load it like that. Yeah, but does anybody know why you did it? Well,
Right.
we'd start digging in, and one time a piece of steel was too greased and it slid and it hit something. So they're doing this incredibly inefficient thing because 20 years ago, one problem popped up.
Right. Which probably could have been solved other ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what you realize is that the really good companies are the ones when you ask them, hey, why do you do that?
They have a
They
good
go,
answer.
oh, because what we tried doing it like this, and
Right.
well, that kind of bent that way. And they understand why they do their basic things.
Right. They're not just wandering through following, one guy tells this guy, he tells that guy, and they go, I don't know. John told me to do it that way. He asked John. John goes, well, Robert told me that 3 years ago. Robert learned, right? And then you find out. So it's really a failure to really be, let's say, curious about your business, right? To know why you do things, how you do things. Are they efficient? And you find these companies where there's better ways to do things. Is that what it comes down to?
Oh, totally. And it's a balance. I go back to, we look at every deal completely as big picture.
Independent.
Because
okay.
I have yet to ever walk in a company that every single thing was being done a way that I thought it should be done.
Yeah, of course, never the case. Right.
But what we actually look for is if I go, hey, have you guys thought about it like this? The best sellers respond, can you tell me why you're thinking to do it that way? The worst ones go, yeah, we tried that once, it didn't work.
Right. Yeah, there you go.
And you're just like,
close-minded.
I don't know if
I didn't finish the sentence yet,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a balance going on there that you want to work with. The other one too is the seller, the day you own the business, all intents and purposes no longer has a say.
Right.
But if we're having anything combative with the seller,
yeah,
they're off the books, because the reality is most likely they're that combative with their people.
Yeah.
Which means I have such an uphill battle training training people to understand that we want their opinions heavily.
Right. Building trust. He didn't do
that. And that is a very, very hard thing to do. I've had
you shy away from those situations when you find out.
Pretty much.
Just puts a bad taste in your mouth.
There's always the one that we're like, hey,
this is so good, we'll deal with it. But yeah.
Yeah. And every once in a while you'll meet like a guy like that, and then his GM, you realize, has been his whipping boy for a long time. And it's really just not like he's taking all of it.
Yeah.
And the employees are feeling none of it. And then, hey, I've got an amazing built-in person to take this over. So that will change the tone there, because now you have one person to earn the trust of, not the entire company.
Got it.
So we look for a ton of different factors. It's really interesting to sit down with the partners after we vet something and watching people just pick apart. Okay, well, I think this, I want to look at this. Let's go look at that. And you really can figure out a business very quickly if you just start talking to the people inside of it.
Right. No. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. And I guess it's a learning opportunity for you guys. I mean, nobody gets the opportunity to evaluate a lot of businesses over their lifetime. They really don't. Maybe they buy one, sell one. I've met guys who you and I would consider serial entrepreneurs, and they've bought and sold not at half a dozen businesses, because one person, how many can you do? But if you're, constantly building things. So looking back, or even currently, well, what are the things that you think like that you've learned that you do differently? If you're giving advice to an entrepreneur getting started, maybe they're not 15, but maybe they're 25, 30, 35, kind of advice would you give them?
Really, first off, the ego's got to get checked.
Okay. Does not help you. It doesn't help you, right?
But the counter of that is confidence is absolute key.
Right.
You must believe in what you're doing. The other one is, and I learned this from a friend of mine years ago, or he put it into context for me really well.
Yeah.
And it was making decisions. People make decisions too slow. And he goes, think about it this way, Jason. If you've got an A, B, okay, instead of thinking is A right or is B right?
Right.
if I choose B and I'm wrong, how quickly can I notice? And how much effort and resources does it take to switch to A?
Right. Well, there's no question about it. We get committed to things emotionally and we just hang on
Well,
for no good reason.
Well, and what it taught us was you can make decisions and just tell everybody who is outside of the decision circle, go, hey, I'm doing this. Instead of this, but here's where I see there might be flaws.
Yeah.
And they will then keep eyes out and keep you honest with yourself and go, hey, that thing you talked about is coming up. We need to look at it. And then you're like, oh, okay, maybe we made the wrong decision, go the other direction. So really that decision-making and understanding that chances are you're going to be wrong.
Right.
But it's how you recover from being wrong that makes it the right decision.
Always. So were there some can you think of an example of some companies and purchases you made that were just a bust? You thought were great? Maybe not you yourself, but collectively you guys were like, we can do a lot with this thing, and you were just way off.
Yeah, we did one of those years ago. We had a really good opportunity, and I needed a plastics company to make it. And we met an owner. He was wonderful, and we bought his company. And what we missed that the company that we weren't, and this is way before the fund. This is probably
early days. Okay.
And we realized that we bought his company on the merit of what it was going to do for a project we had outside of the company, instead of buying his company on its own merit. And it was a mistake. We learned from it. And now every company must stand on its own merit. And then we can look at what adding it to our system does. But it was a learning experience. And that project kind of fizzled over here. The company wasn't structured correct. And it caused pain, but it was part of that process. And now it's completely changed how we look at companies. Any company we buy must stand on the merit by which we're buying it, without any external source.
Right. Because if that project disappears and the company's not viable, then you got a big problem, which I guess.
Yeah. Well, and it's a risk balance. So now I've got two possible positives for this company and only one possible negative.
Yeah.
It makes me win a heck of a lot more.
Right. Right. Well, good advice for people that are listening. I think that a lot of people, they get started in business and they just kind of jump in and they don't have any process in which we make it. And I had a neuroscientist on my podcast a while ago, and he wrote a book called Never Go With Your Gut. And, it's about, which it sounds to me like you guys do the same thing. It's about having processes that you use and you adjust them a little bit, right? But where you evaluate things and make decisions that are consistent, that work for you, as opposed to going in there and, wow, this place smells great. I think we can do a lot here. And you don't really look past the things that you're supposed to look at every single time, because then that avoids the mistakes. Like you said, if we screw this up, where do we go from here? That's a good process, right? Because it doesn't mean it doesn't eliminate mistakes, but eliminates the impact of your mistakes on the rest of the company, right?
Well, yeah. And the other side of that is, if you can't do that personally, and I've met a lot of great entrepreneurs who cannot acknowledge when they're wrong.
Right. Well, so that's a shortcoming. It just really is.
But these guys, guys who have made so many millions of dollars that they could pay for everything in the world over and over. So, but there's a commonality with all those. They surround themselves by a bunch of people they don't get along with, or that they don't see at all eye to eye with.
Right.
So that even if they can't acknowledge they're wrong, there's 20 people around them telling them they're wrong.
Right.
And that works. I'm very fortunate that I love when people prove me wrong, because it means I chose the right people.
Right. So, yeah, I feel the same way. You can't always be right. I'm like, well, nobody has any comments. No, it looks great. Can't be great. It can't be great. I'm one person, right?
Well, so I look at like my GPs, and I've had multiple people turn to me like, none of you make any sense being friends.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but we are the best. I mean, these are four of my best friends in the world.
Right.
But one of them's really into sports. One of them is really into being out in the outdoors. One of them's really, really creative and artistic. None of us make sense together.
Right. No, but maybe you do, because you bring different skills and a different purview to the same entity, the same transaction. So you're all going to look at it differently.
Well, and it's wonderful like that, because
Yeah.
we honest to God look at every single thing completely different through different lenses. And then we'll sit there and go, well, this thing has a problem there. Well, but I can fix that problem. How about that problem? Oh, no, I got that. And you start putting it all together, like, oh, okay, this is a good position for us to be in. Or sometimes one of them will be like, that is impossible to fix. Well, is that important? Well, it's the thing I do, and that's important. So it's impossible to fix. This thing won't work. And we've had deals go like that too, where one partner's just like, I know everyone else loves it,
but here's
my side of the business is not, it's not reparable.
Right. Right. Yeah, I understand that. Well, that's it's a lot to be said for that, and having a good team and learning to work with people. And I think that you're right. People, they're stubborn, they're stuck on their own beliefs, and they won't accept. And you know what? They don't get the input from their people that they should, when the people are all on the same team and all marching in the same direction and all cheering each other on and constructively pointing things out to people that aren't working and whatever. And sometimes there's a boss that people are just afraid of, and they don't respond. So it's good that you recognize all that stuff. So how can people learn more about you, about the companies, about what you guys are doing outside of the podcast, obviously?
Yeah. So about the company, go to mrca.net. On there is,
put a link in the show notes.
Awesome. On there is a link to invest with us if you're interested in that. There's also information on what we're doing, on the team we've got. Also on there is a link to schedule time directly on my calendar or other GPs. We open up to anyone. You want to discuss something, discuss your business, discuss selling us your business, discuss how to cook cookies. We don't really care. We're down to talk. We're very much about sharing your information. If you want to follow information with me, the best way is on LinkedIn.
Okay. I like
search
LinkedIn.
Jason Azevedo MRCA, it pops right up.
Okay.
There's kind of a constant content stream up there of things that both me and the company are thinking are interesting, things that are changing in the world that we are kind of pushing out to people. There's starting to be more and more updates of us stopping at the plants and going out and checking out cool local community events that exist throughout this country. So
any particular businesses that you're looking at right now in, that do certain things? Like you said, one does sheet metal, the other one does extract. Anything on the drawing board?
I'm pretty sure if I said the ones we're currently looking at, I'd get in a little bit of trouble.
Okay, good. They'd have to shoot me on the podcast. I don't want you to do that.
Unfortunately, ones I'm looking at only come up once we're closed.
Okay, good. All right. So Jason, I can't thank you enough. I know it's a little bit earlier where you are, but it's almost dinner time where I am, and now it's getting dark. I think there's a storm coming in. So I will, let's definitely stay in touch. I want to follow your story and see what you guys are doing. And if people are listening, check you out at mrca.net and on LinkedIn.
Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks, Jason.